Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking news about the coronavirus. Late today, a stunning announcement. Lockdowns planned for more than 10 million people in Italy as the disease spreads. Here in the U.S., states of emergency coast to coast. In California, questions about where this cruise ship will go with coronavirus patients on board. And word of another cruise ship the government is now tracking. In Washington state, new fears as nursing homes are hit hard. It's disrupting travel as well. Amtrak now making a major change. And the government's mixed messages on those testing kits. Will there be enough? We have it all covered and begin in San Francisco with Steve Patterson and the latest on that quarantined cruise ship.
Tonight, more than 3,500 passengers on the Grand Princess wondering what's next. The vice president today saying the ship will dock at a non-commercial port.
New quarantining standards will be coordinated with the CDC for all ships.
21 people on board were found positive with the coronavirus, including 19 crew members. The U.S. Coast Guard delivered kits last week, but so far only 45 people have been tested.
There's a little uncertainty that have we been exposed to it? Do we have it?
Overnight, crews forced to remove a sick passenger transported off the ship by the Coast Guard. The cruise line releasing a statement saying the illness was not related to coronavirus.
It's just the not knowing. The not is the scariest part.
Eva and John Weisberger, stuck on board, have filed a lawsuit against the cruise liner. The couple worried about the virus because of their age and Ron's heart condition.
I know I'm going to run out of medication by Wednesday.
And it's heart medication, so that's really dangerous.
Yeah. The U.S. death toll rising to at least 19, impacting both coasts after 2 deaths reported in Florida. There are now over 400 positive cases across the country. The epicenter, Washington state, with more than 100 confirmed cases and at least 16 deaths. 2 new nursing homes in Seattle announced positive patients after a week of misery at the Life Care Center in Kirkland.
It's been a very trying time for everybody involved here.
Meanwhile, the economy suffering. In Seattle, some hotel bookings down 50%.
We started to receive phone calls, and it's hitting our employees. It's hitting our business.
And Amtrak today announcing it's canceling nonstop service from New York to Washington because of falling demand.
And see, the vice president says they're tracking another ship that may have shared a crew. What are they worried about?
Yeah, the vice president confirmed this today. They are tracking another ship that may have shared a crew member with either the Grand Princess or the Diamond Princess. And they're worried about replicating the same situation that we have off the coast of San Francisco right now. No additional details on that ship except to say that they want to test every crew member on board. Jose.
Steve Patterson in San Francisco, thank you. Tonight, President Trump's coronavirus task force is making changes that will impact the hard-hit cruise industry. Hans Nichols is traveling with the president and reports from Florida.
Tonight, Vice President Pence leading the White House's public response to coronavirus, calling for new standards from the cruise line industry.
Enhance entry and exit screening, and also to establish shipboard testing for the coronavirus. New quarantining standards will be coordinated with the CDC for all ships.
And he urged the elderly and the infirm to stay off cruises.
This would be a good time to practice common sense and to avoid activities, including traveling on a cruise line.
Pence traveling to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, an hour away from President Trump, who spent the morning at his golf club after his visit to the CDC in Atlanta yesterday, where he asked Americans to remain calm and insisted that there were enough tests for the virus.
Anybody that needs a test gets a test.
But at a White House briefing today, Secretary Alex Azar forced to clarify the president's remarks, calling it shorthand, adding that what he meant to say is that you need a doctor's order for a test. As he confronts the biggest health crisis of his presidency, Trump ousting his chief of staff, calling on Congressman Mark Meadows to replace Mick Mulvaney. Meadows, long a front row member of Team Trump, was a fierce defender of the president on impeachment and will go on offense to help him win a second term.
I mean, all of a sudden what we have is these strict constitutionalists on the other side of the aisle. Listen, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has nothing to do with anything but raw politics.
Hans, when can Americans expect these new standards from the cruise line industry?
Well, tonight Pence said that he expects the industry to develop those new standards over the next 72 hours. He also added that he hasn't been tested himself for the coronavirus. Jose?
Hans Nichols in West Palm Beach, Florida, thank you. The impact of coronavirus around the world is becoming more dire. Tonight, Italy's government is preparing to lock down more than 10 million people to keep the disease from spreading. Bill Neely reports from Milan, one of the areas that will be impacted by this planned lockdown.
Italy has seen nothing like this. Hospitals overwhelmed, deaths rising fast.
With hundreds of new infections and dozens of new deaths every day, Italy has now replaced China as the epicenter health experts are most worried about.
The scientist who identified the Italian strain says they're fighting a fast-moving enemy.
Viruses are always changing.
So each strain of the virus is changing all the time.
I think so, that we are facing a real emergency.
And tonight, emergency measures. The Italian government preparing to lock down a region of 10 million people, including Milan, Italy's business centre, where the streets were quiet today. No one would be allowed to leave or enter for weeks. Pope Francis, who was coughing earlier this week with a cold, will lead Sunday prayers tomorrow, not from this balcony, but by video link. At a U.S. military base in Naples, a junior officer became the first U.S. serviceman in Europe to test positive for the virus. Across the world, there are now more than 105,000 cases of the virus in at least 95 countries, with more than 3,500 deaths. In China, dozens of people who'd been quarantined in a hotel were buried when the building collapsed. More than 30, including children, were pulled out, but scores are still trapped. It's a global battle against a virus spreading fast. Bill Neely, NBC News, Milan.
And while we're still learning about the coronavirus, I want to give you some important context. So far, we know of fewer than 24 deaths from coronavirus in the U.S. By comparison, between 12 and 60,000 Americans die of the flu in an average year. The big concern, there's no vaccine yet. Also, it may be easier to catch and appears to be especially dangerous for the elderly and anyone with underlying medical conditions. However, current estimates note about 80% of people who get it will not need to go to the hospital.